It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Curt Hagman is with us today. He is a member of the California State Assembly. He's one of the nominees for a seat on the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County. Sir, a tremendous showing in June. You are advancing to the general election for an open seat on that board. I think it's fair to say you were up against a pretty strong opponent with a lot of money. I think she outspent you 3-1, maybe more, but you came in basically 41-41. What went right?
It's just hopefully all about the issues and the policies that we voted for. There's a clear distinction between the two of us. And our job in the campaign is hopefully point out the differences.
Right.
And what direction the county is going to go forward.
So what did you hear on the ground when you were running in that San Bernardino seat, which is basically western San Bernardino County?
For the most part, the issues are still like it is in generically economy and quality of life, which really ties back to something we've talked about here in the past is AB 109, the crime rates and stuff going up.
Sure.
And we have different voting records on both those issues. And
let's talk about crime, because it's amazing to me that we're still discussing the death penalty in 2014. It seemed as if, 20 years ago, when the death penalty was at its peak of popularity, 80%, that the issue had been resolved, that the country had said, we want to be a death penalty nation, and that's it. But there's no doubt that this has been a tricky year for the death penalty. We've had 2 botched executions, one recently in Arizona and another one in Oklahoma in connection with lethal injections. I heard that Tennessee is thinking about bringing back the electric chair because lethal injections aren't going well. Judge Kaczynski talked about firing squads. I mean, it's amazing to me that we're still kind of on this discussion, but let's talk most generally about the death penalty. Then I want to talk about a decision that came out recently as well.
No, absolutely. And in California, that's why we haven't had any executions for a long time, because we've been held up in the process of how to make it correct. We were attacked on the environmentals of our death penalty chamber.
Right.
It's not big enough. You can't have enough witnesses in it. Our lethal injection's not up to date. And so basically it's a way to stall these executions. And my belief is death penalty is twofold. It's not just a punishment, but hopefully a deterrent against the crimes from happening in the first place. And without having an execution, you don't have that deterrent.
So let's talk about what you just described, kind of this deterrent effect, because recently a appointee of George W. Bush, of all people, Orange County based of all places, he came out with a decision and he ruled that the California death penalty was unconstitutional. And his reasoning was part of what you've described, but just kind of on its head. What he said is that we don't have the death penalty, we have life in prison with a remote possibility of death. That the fact that it takes so long for a death sentence to actually be delivered, that it's neither punishment nor retribution. Correct. It's neither. What's your sense of what he is saying?
I see where he's coming from, and that's because the system is broken. And it does take away from the effect of having this if you don't actually utilize it. And for those who actually deserve it. Like I have a case from my home city that's been, I think he's on death row 25 years now, that also, it was a heinous crime, killed, butchered several people, and still sitting on the death row. So we're frustrated that it's not in place. I actually put legislation through in the past to try to speed up the process, but it's been bogged down in the courts because of all these things. If it is humane enough to kill someone in a certain way.
I mean, you talk about 25 years. I'm sure you remember the Hillside Strangler. I mean, he petrified the Los Angeles County, even into the Inland Empire area. I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s. He died after 24 years of cancer. He wasn't executed. I mean, the court talked about this. For every 1 inmate executed in California, 7 have died of natural causes. And so it really begs the question, are we even being honest about this? I mean, wouldn't it be more honest to just institute, the argument goes, life without parole, and it'd be less expensive. I mean, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on the death penalty, and yet people aren't being executed.
No, I think you have to go one or the other. Either what you say or fix the system. I advocate for fixing the system. The voters asked for it. We're the ones in the legislature that has complicated that process to make it to the point where it takes 20 years to execute someone in California. So we could actually undo the woes that we did, put it back to a reasonable process to make sure no one slips through the cracks, and make it a 5 to 7 year process. And then I think that would counteract the judge's ruling as well. And it'd be back in fiscal, whatever way you want to look at it, it does balance it out. But the biggest thing for death penalty is that deterrence. And if you don't use it, it's not being a deterrent no more.
So you talk about the expense, and apparently what Judge Carney said, and I think he was relying on some studies that have been done by experts in the field, that in order for the death penalty to work in California, we would need to increase the death penalty budget from $184 million a year and add another $85 million a year. That's a lot of money.
It is.
That's a lot of money. And so does the legislature, a body which you are leaving because of term limits, have the stomach?
No, I think for the most part, the legislature on my colleague's side are looking at a way to slow this process down or stop this process. And that's why we came up with some of the bills. Different philosophical beliefs in when that the death penalty works and who it's targeted at and those type of arguments when it comes to the politics of it. If you take that $85 million, it's far cheaper than what we're spending to house these folks for 25 years. Going through all the appeals and process, it costs, 4 to 10 times much more?
Since we've reinstituted the death penalty, the state has spent over $4 billion on capital cases, about $300 million for every execution that we've been able to met out.
If you look at strictly an economic thing, it'd be much cheaper to put them in front of a firing squad like when the other judges advocated for. You have to try to look at that, the magic in the middle. Can we get this system unbroken and back on this track? Does it have the effect of hopefully stopping horrible crimes from happening because people are afraid of it?
But could one argue that life in prison without the possibility of parole, truly without the possibility of parole, is much more deterring than death? I mean, death is over.
It is a perspective. For those, I have talked to some people who said they had an easier time back in prison than they do on the streets when they don't have a job, no place to live, and those type of things. I've heard that. And so I think it's what you look at. We also have advocates making it much easier to stay in prison, always looking for the conditions of the inmates there. I think it's definitely, to the average person on the street, not something they want to look forward to ever.
Right, but the average person on the street is likely not a perpetrator of a capital murder. And so, look, I'm really just talking it out because, look, this is not an easy issue. I mean, I'm sure you would agree. This is a complicated issue with so many layers.
Economic, it's also justice. How about the victims of the families to ever have closure upon that, which they don't.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. I saw the press conference or pieces of the press conference relating to the Arizona botched execution. And you had members of the press saying he was snorting, he was gasping. You had the victim's family saying, what are you talking about? He was just snoring. And so it really, a lot of where you stand depends on where you sit.
Yeah, and that's for 2 minutes. How about those people who are
but this was
raped
a 2-hour,
and tortured and abused for days and not, hours and then killed? Is there that balance of justice there or not? So it's supposed to be a number of things there.
What about potential innocence? Does that come into play? I mean, apparently not in California, but there is at least one case that Columbia University points to from 1989 where a gentleman named Carlos de Luna was executed in Texas, and an exhaustive study suggests, that he was innocent. Mm-hmm. Does that come into play, the possibility that we could be executing innocent people?
I think there's always that very, very slim chance. I hope with new forensics and the new science, and they could build that into the equation, that not just eyewitness that could be off.
I was reading an
DNA and others that just have.
I was reading an op-ed of yours. Kevin Cooper from Chino Hills committed savage murders in 1983. He claimed a DNA test was proof of his innocence. In fact, what did it do?
It affirmed that his guilt.
It affirmed his guilt. So
I think there's the science part of it, and in the courses I've taken in public safety and others, eyewitness is one of the worst type of.
I've heard that, yes.
But when it comes down to DNA, it's pretty accurate.
Okay, his name is Curt Hagman. He is a member of the California State Assembly, candidate for Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.
I'm not what the girls here would call classically good looking. I spent most of my youth in the dreaded friend zone. That all changed when my folks got Charter TV. I discovered tons of chick flicks in HD and on demand, and learned all the secrets to romancing the high school girl. Now in a school full of boys, I'm the man. I'm the man.
Get Charter TV starting at $29.99 per month. Charter, make way for more.